my name is Anne, and I'm going to be taking you through the tax processes for business revision sessions in this series. This is now task number 2. So if you haven't listened to task 1 yet, you may like to go back and do that, where we have a little bit more of an introduction about the reference material and the mark allocation throughout the assessment and so on. In this session, we're going to just dive straight in, and we are going to be having a look at task number 2 here, which is calculating and accounting for VAT. Right, let's get this set up. There we are. So calculating and accounting for VAT then worth 8 marks. Sorts of things you are going to see in this task are going to include calculating of VAT. So if you're given the gross figure, can you calculate the VAT and the net? If you're given the net figure, can you calculate the VAT and the gross, and so on. Understanding what we mean by input and output VAT. Understanding the calculations and how to get from a VAT inclusive and exclusive amount based on all sorts of different taxable supplies, so standard rated, reduced rated, and so on. Understand how to deal with discounts, understand VAT invoices and what needs to be included on those, and also understanding a simplified invoice and how that differs from a full invoice. Also tax points pop up here. So quite a lot, but also some great resources in the reference material for this one. We have a helpful table that shows the contents of VAT invoices. I'd definitely point you towards that one. And we also have the rules on tax points included in the reference material as well. So tax points are here, section 9. And then contents of a VAT invoice. Oh, it's hyperlinked, so it's just taking me straight there. Contents of a VAT invoice are there. All right. And rates of VAT, of course, in section number 1. We see those often. So I think it is quite important to be familiar with where to find these things in the reference material. They will be available to you throughout your assessment through pop-up windows. But if you know what area you're looking in, it's going to make everything a little quicker. So here is our example. Let's give it a go. Fox is VAT registered and sells a mixture of standard rated, reduced rated and zero rated supplies. Complete the table to show the VAT amount and the net amount for the following supplies. Round down to the nearest penny. If your answer is 0, enter 0. Okay, so first one then is a standard rated supply. And if you need to, you can check out the rates of VAT. Standard rated is 20%. Reduced rate is 5%. And because this is a revision course, I am just going to revise a couple of different things before we actually get going with the task. And the first of those things really just being the structure between the net, the VAT and the gross figure. So different people have different approaches to this, and I know there's all sorts of shortcuts, but I tend to go with the idea that the net invoice value is equal to 100%. So if VAT is 20%, that would get added on top of the 100, and then that would give me the gross invoice value equivalent to 120%. If that was then money, the net invoice would be £100, the VAT would be 20, and the gross would be 120. And by doing it that way, then that helps me then when I come to do my reduced rate, because the net remains 100, but the reduced rate VAT is 5%. And the gross is then 105%. So standard and reduced. So now I understand that, I can look at the question and see the first one is a standard rated supply and I've been given the gross figure. So I know that this £525 is the equivalent of 120%. Let me show you how I would work that out. I would say £525 divided by 120 will give me the value of 1%, because 120 percentage points are worth 525. Divide by 120, 1 percentage point will be worth whatever the answer to that is. I then need to know what the net figure is, so I multiply it by 100. I multiply by 100 to find the net. You can then repeat the process, divide by 120 to find 1%, and multiply by 20 to find the VAT. But to be honest, you don't have to do both calculations, because once you've found the net, you can find the VAT as just being the difference. And let me explain what I mean. So if I find the net figure to be 437.50, and I know that the gross is 525, then by default, the VAT is £87.50. But just because this is a revision course and we're revising as much as we can, let me do the second working. 525 divided by 120, and then multiply by 20 will give me 87.50 as the VAT amount. So there we go, that's the first one. And the reason I like this method rather than the shortcuts over like 5/6 and all of that stuff is because it then works again for the reduced rate supply. So I have to learn one method and then I just use it with every calculation. So it's still £525 gross, but for working 2, the VAT included in there is only 5%. So this gross figure of 525 is now 105%. So to find the value of 1%, this time I divide by 105. And then multiply by 100. And then I divide by 105, and to find the VAT, multiply by 5. £500. Oops. 500 there, and 25 there. Fabulous. And of course, there's no marks for workings in the assessment, so it's just the final answer. You will have workings paper to use. I would definitely recommend using it. And I would also draw the little cost structure that I drew here, just to focus my mind. There is time in this exam. It's not one where you're going to be rushing against the clock to get it finished. There's generally a little bit of time left over. So make sure you just use it to take your time a little bit as you actually make your way through the questions. Don't rush them. Make sure that you are confident with each one as you go along. Okay. Then the next one then says 0 rated. 0 rated means no VAT is added. So the VAT content is 0. So that must mean the net is 525. So that's arguably the easiest of all those 3. And that's 6 marks. I've then got some true and false questions. And these true and false questions are in relation to supplies less than £250. It says we can exclude customer details. So it's talking about invoices. Identify whether the following statements about invoices are true or false. Remember what I said, that there's a little section on invoices. Let's just check here where it is. It's section 6. So let's go to section 6 and see what it says. Now there's a little section about simplified invoices. And simplified invoices are available where the supplies are less than £250. And if the supplies cost less than £250, what does the invoice need to include? Well, it includes the supplier's name, address, and VAT registration number, the time of supply, so the tax point, a description, which in some way identifies the goods or the services, and for each applicable VAT rate, so maybe there's some exempt items and some standard rated items, For each applicable VAT rate, the total amount at that VAT rate, and then the VAT rate that applies. So you might say standard rated was £200, 20% VAT was included, etc. Nowhere in there does it mention the customer's name and address. And yet in the full invoice up here, it clearly states the customer's name and address must be included. So I can now say, if the customer's name was supposed to be included, it would be in my list. So that statement is true. Supplies less than £250, including VAT, I can exclude customer details because they're not in my list. So I'm going to say true. On a simplified invoice, it should state that the invoice is not a VAT invoice. Now that won't be in the reference material, I'm quite sure, but it is a VAT invoice. It's called a simplified VAT invoice. So that is not true. Now there is a type of invoice where I specifically have to say, this is not a VAT invoice, but it's not a simplified one. So just take a minute, see if you remember the name of the one where we have to put on it specifically, this is not a VAT invoice. It's actually called a pro forma invoice, which is something that we might send out in advance to get our customer to pay a deposit. So we're saying, okay, we will do this job for you. Say you're a builder, we will do this job, but we need some money in advance to pay for our materials. So can you advance 10% of the total value? Here's a pro forma invoice, like a request for payment. It is not a tax invoice, but a simplified invoice is. And that's it. A rather short and sweet task number 2.